Have you ever felt like something wasn't quite right, but you couldn't explain why? Like you were being pulled into something, a smile, a gesture, a soft voice, and yet deep down, your instincts whispered, "Be careful." Most people would dismiss that feeling. They'd say you're overthinking. But Nietzsche wouldn't. In fact, he'd say you're finally beginning to see something the world doesn't want you to see. Because Friedrich Nietzsche didn't believe everything sweet was innocent. He believed that behind every social ritual, every polite gesture, every charming face, there's a deeper instinct at play, one that isn't always safe, one that isn't always conscious, and one that we are trained to ignore. He called it will to power, and he believed it didn't just belong to men. Women, too, have their own form of power. Only theirs is quieter, smoother, more hidden, and that's exactly what makes it dangerous. This isn't a war between men and women. It's not about blame. It's about waking up. Because if you don't understand how power actually works, if you keep thinking it only looks like violence, control, or money, you'll miss the more subtle forms. The emotional ones, the psychological ones, the ones that don't need to raise their voice to control a room. Nietzsche warned us about this over 100 years ago, but no one listened. They called him bitter, misogynist, crazy, but maybe he was just early. Because in today's world, where softness is sold as innocence and charm is packaged as harmless, maybe the danger isn't in what we see, but in what we don't question. In this series, we're going to talk about the side of female nature that no one dares to touch, not to demonize it, not to glorify it, but to see it clearly. Let's begin. She smiles, and the room softens. Eyes turn, voices lower, tension fades. It looks harmless, beautiful, even. But Nietzsche saw something else. He saw a mask, not one made of lies, but instinct. He believed that what we call feminine charm isn't weakness. It's a tool, a performance shaped by survival, by evolution, by centuries of needing to influence without force. And if you only see the surface, you'll misunderstand everything. Nietzsche lived in a time when women weren't allowed open power, so they learned to move differently, through suggestion, seduction, emotional sensitivity. Not manipulation in the cruel sense, but strategy. Quiet, precise, and effective. He warned, what looks like innocence can often be instinct dressed in beauty. Not because women are deceptive, but because nature is. Charm is not just attraction, it's control. And the most dangerous part? It doesn't look dangerous at all. In today's world, that mask still exists. But now it's been romanticized, branded, filtered into our feeds. Sweetness is sold as virtue, softness as moral superiority, and men, especially young men, are being told to surrender to it without question, to trust appearances over instincts, to lower their guard in the name of kindness. But Nietzsche asked, what if that kindness is a form of power? What if the danger isn't in aggression, but in influence that can't be seen? This is not about blaming women. It's about waking up to dynamics we've been trained to ignore. Because if power always wore a crown or carried a weapon, it would be easy to see. But when power smiles, when it flirts, when it pretends not to be power at all, that's when it shapes you the most. Nietzsche wasn't afraid of violence. He was afraid of charm. Because charm doesn't force you, it invites you. And that's exactly why it works. We've been told a lie, that men seek power and women seek love, that one dominates, the other nurtures. But Nietzsche didn't see it that way. He believed both men and women want power, just in different forms. Not because they are evil, but because they are human. And to ignore this truth is to walk blindly into manipulation, disguised as emotion. The difference isn't in the desire, it's in the delivery. Men were taught to chase status, territory, achievement. Their power is loud, visible. But women, especially in the eyes of Nietzsche, were shaped by different rules. Forbidden from open confrontation, they mastered the indirect. They learned to read rooms, feel emotions, mirror desires, not out of malice, but survival. And over time, this became their strength, a type of psychological warfare the world still refuses to name. Because when power doesn't look like power, it's harder to resist. We live in a time where the narrative is simple. If a woman is hurt, she must be a victim. If she cries, she must be honest. If she leaves, it's because she was mistreated. But Nietzsche refused to accept that simplicity. He believed people are far more complex, women included, that beneath the surface of tenderness, there can be fierce calculation, a power not less real than a man's muscle, but far more difficult to detect. And here's the danger. When you ignore this form of power, you become vulnerable to it. You assume there is no game, and so you never learn how to play. Nietzsche didn't hate women. He simply saw them clearly. Not as soft, but strategic. Not as passive, but precise. And if you keep thinking emotional power is less real than physical strength, you'll lose battles you don't even realize you're in. Seduction is not an accident. It's not just chemistry, timing, or magic. It's nature. Targeted, precise, and deeply intentional. Nietzsche didn't see it as something shallow or playful. He saw it as a weapon nature designed. A strategy woven into beauty, voice, vulnerability, and unpredictability. He believed seduction was the language of power written in silence. And the most dangerous part? The person using it often doesn't even know they're doing it. We like to think attraction is personal, that you're drawn to someone because of who they are. But Nietzsche would say, no, you're being moved by instincts older than your mind. You're being pulled by something deeper, something evolutionary. Female seduction, in Nietzsche's view, wasn't about morality. It wasn't about love. It was about selection, about influence, about controlling outcomes in a world where direct control was never allowed. Think about it. Why do certain gestures, playing with hair, subtle glances, soft laughter, affect people so deeply? Why does beauty, especially when paired with mystery, seem to override reason? It's because seduction isn't asking for attention. It's guiding it. Nietzsche believed this wasn't a conscious act. It was instinct, a biological intelligence working through emotion, expression, and allure. In today's world, seduction has only evolved. Now it comes through the screen, through perfectly curated posts, subtle poses, the suggestion of vulnerability mixed with unattainability. It's not evil. It's not fake. But it is powerful. And if you think you're immune to it, you've already lost. Because Nietzsche wasn't warning you about seduction as a trick. He was warning you about seduction as design. Not just to attract, but to direct. And when you ignore the purpose behind the pull, you confuse emotion for truth. And that confusion can cost you everything. We don't just desire women, we worship them. We place them on pedestals. We write songs, poems, entire religions around the idea of the sacred feminine, the pure one, the muse, the savior. But Nietzsche didn't buy it. He saw this idealization not as love, but as illusion, a dangerous illusion. Because when you place someone above reality, you no longer see them. You project onto them. You create a fantasy, and fantasies have a price. Nietzsche warned that the most seductive lie isn't told by women, it's told by men to themselves. The lie that says, she is perfect. The lie that says, she would never hurt me. This isn't love, it's blindness. It's a refusal to confront complexity. And Nietzsche knew, when a man turns a woman into a goddess, he forgets she is human. He stops seeing her instincts, her contradictions, her shadow. And in doing so, he makes himself vulnerable, not to her cruelty, but to his own delusion. In 2025, this delusion still thrives. You see it every time a man falls for a woman he barely knows, every time he confuses beauty with virtue, every time he's more in love with the idea of her than the reality. That's not romance. That's surrender, not to her, but to his own need to be saved. Nietzsche believed this is why so many men collapse emotionally, not because women destroy them, but because their illusions do. To idealize is to control. You think you're worshiping her, but really, you're avoiding yourself, avoiding truth, avoiding risk. Because real connection isn't built on perfection, it's built on presence. Nietzsche didn't want men to stop loving women. He wanted them to stop dreaming. Because once you wake up, love is no longer blind, it's chosen. And that's where real strength begins. There's a kind of control that doesn't shout. It doesn't demand, threaten, or force. It cries. It withdraws. It accuses without words. Nietzsche saw it clearly. When emotion becomes a tool, it stops being honest. He believed one of the most dangerous forms of power is the emotional kind, the kind that appears soft on the surface, but cuts deep beneath it. Not because it's loud, but because it's silent, because it wraps control in the appearance of vulnerability. In a culture that teaches us to protect feelings at all costs, emotional expression is sacred. But Nietzsche wasn't fooled by the tears. He knew that emotion, when used without awareness, becomes a game. A way to win without appearing to fight. A way to dominate while claiming victimhood. And what makes it so effective is that no one dares to question it. Because the moment you do, you're cold. You're cruel. You're the problem. You've seen this before. The person who suddenly grows distant without explaining. The one who cries at the right time, not because they're broken, but because it resets the dynamic. The guilt, the confusion, the pressure to fix things, it all falls on you. And the more you try to solve it, the deeper you fall into the trap. Nietzsche would say, "You're not dealing with emotion, you're dealing with strategy wearing emotion's face." This isn't about blaming women. It's about seeing that when society gives one side the emotional high ground, it also gives them invisible leverage. Nietzsche believed that unchecked emotion can become a quiet tyranny, a form of power that hides behind hurt. And in 2025, where emotions are currency, this warning has never been more urgent. Because if you can't name the game, you're already playing it and losing. There's a kind of danger that doesn't explode. It builds. Slowly. Silently. It hides behind politeness, smiles, and good intentions. Nietzsche called it ressentiment, a deep resentment that grows when someone suppresses their true instincts for too long. And he believed that in societies where women were told to always be nice, always be gentle, always be good, this resentment didn't go away. It just learned how to wear a mask. You see it when someone plays the moral high ground, not because they believe in it, but because it gives them control. You see it when bitterness is disguised as boundaries, when envy hides behind principles, when judgment sounds like care. Nietzsche warned that when desire is denied, it doesn't disappear, it rots. And that rot comes back out, not through open conflict, but through passive resistance, coldness, guilt-tripping, and unspoken punishment. In our modern world, the pressure on women to appear virtuous is still massive. They must not offend, not compete, not express raw ambition or sexuality without being labeled. So what happens? Those instincts don't die. They go underground. And when they return as shadows. Criticism disguised as concern, distance disguised as dignity, manipulation disguised as modesty. Nietzsche saw this not as a female flaw, but as a collective sickness, a system that forces people to fake virtue while secretly feeding on resentment. This is why some of the most destructive dynamics feel clean on the surface, because they're powered by emotions that were never allowed to be felt fully. In 2025, we glorify the image of the good woman, but Nietzsche would ask, at what cost? When you suppress the wolf to wear the lamb's skin, it doesn't make you harmless. It just makes the bite harder to see. Most men think the threat is outside, that the danger lies in what women do, in how they behave, how they manipulate, how they seduce. But Nietzsche left us with a final twist. The most dangerous woman isn't out there. It's inside you. Your own inner chaos. Your craving to be accepted. Your emotional instability dressed as logic. He called it the anima, the feminine within. And if you don't confront her, she will run your life without you knowing. This isn't about becoming stoic or shutting down. It's deeper than that. Nietzsche believed that every man carries a part of the feminine psyche within him, a side that's emotional, intuitive, reactive. When undeveloped, that part becomes volatile. It lashes out in relationships. It gets wounded by rejection. It becomes obsessed with approval, affection, softness. And the worst part? It dresses itself in righteousness. It tells you you're in love when really you're addicted to being seen. It tells you you're being kind when you're just afraid to lose her. In 2025, men are more emotionally confused than ever. They're praised for being sensitive, but punished for being weak. They're told to express, but not too much. They're told to be open, but never needy. And in that storm of contradictions, the inner anima grows wild. Nietzsche warned that if a man doesn't face her, she turns him into a puppet, overthinking, over-explaining, overreacting. This isn't about rejecting emotion. It's about disciplining it, understanding it, owning it. Because when a man integrates his inner feminine, he stops being controlled by outer ones. He no longer chases what drains him. He no longer collapses at the first sign of disapproval. And that, Nietzsche believed, is when a man becomes dangerous, not to women, but to the illusions that once ruled him. There's a moment after the illusions die, after the charm fades, after the projections collapse, where silence sets in. A heavy kind of silence, not around you but inside you. The kind where you realize how much of your life was lived in reaction to beauty, to approval, to emotional games you didn't even know you were part of. Nietzsche believed that this silence isn't the end, it's the beginning, the start of something more powerful than desire, detachment. Because when you stop being controlled by emotional hunger, you start seeing clearly, not bitterly, not hatefully, just honestly. You begin to understand why you fell so hard, why you ignored red flags, why you gave too much to someone who gave little. And in that clarity, something strange happens. You stop blaming her. You stop needing revenge. You stop needing closure. Because the fight was never with her. It was with your own unconscious need to be chosen. Nietzsche called this the rebirth of the self. Not a better mask, not a stronger act, but a return to center. A man who no longer needs to be seen becomes unshakable. He doesn't withdraw in anger. He detaches in peace. He doesn't argue. He watches. And he doesn't chase. Because he finally understands his value is not something to be proved. It's something to be protected. In today's world, silence is rare. Detachment is misunderstood. But Nietzsche saw it as sacred. Not because it makes you superior, but because it makes you free. The moment you stop needing to be understood is the moment you become untouchable. And when the world can no longer bait you with the same old tricks, you're not just awake, you're dangerous. Not because you hurt others, but because you no longer let them hurt you. There's a reason people fear the one who walks away without a word. Not out of anger, not to punish, but because they've seen enough. Nietzsche understood this silence not as weakness, but as the final act of power. When someone no longer reacts, no longer explains, no longer tries to fix what refuses to change, they become something else entirely. Free. And in a world addicted to attention, validation, and emotional noise, freedom is terrifying. Most people aren't looking for love. They're looking for control. Someone to echo their feelings, mirror their pain, respond on cue. But when you step out of that loop, when you stop giving the reaction, when you no longer rise to every bait, you don't just confuse them, you expose them. And this is what Nietzsche meant when he said, truth has enemies. Because when you detach, you remove the mirror. And suddenly, they're left alone with themselves. Most can't handle it. In 2025, walking away is seen as cold, but Nietzsche saw it as sacred. Because the one who walks away is the one who chooses peace over performance. They don't need applause, understanding, or approval. They've seen the script. They know the role they were expected to play, the pleaser, the fixer, the chaser, and they burn it. Not with rage, with clarity. This kind of clarity isn't loud. It doesn't post. It doesn't explain itself in long texts. It simply exits, quietly, fully. And that exit creates more disruption than any argument ever could, because the ones who knew how to play you now realize the game is over. Nietzsche wasn't teaching cruelty. He was teaching boundaries, the kind that say, I've seen enough, I've given enough, and now I leave. Not because I'm weak, but because I finally remember who I am. Once you leave, the world doesn't applaud. It questions you. It accuses you. It whispers that you've changed, that you're too distant, too cold, too full of yourself. But Nietzsche would say, that's the cost of evolution. Not everyone is meant to understand you when you stop playing small. When you stop bending to expectations and begin walking in truth, misunderstanding becomes inevitable. Because the stronger you become, the more clearly you show others their own weakness. And not everyone is ready to see that. This is the loneliness Nietzsche spoke of. Not the loneliness of being alone, but the loneliness of no longer being fake, of no longer keeping peace by betraying yourself. There's a quiet grief in it, a mourning for all the versions of you that tried to please, to prove, to be chosen. But after that grief, something else rises. Not happiness, not yet, but stillness. And in that stillness, you begin to feel power that doesn't shout or flex or beg to be seen. A power that just is. In 2025, the pressure to belong has never been louder. To be liked, to be soft, to be always available. But Nietzsche's path isn't about belonging, it's about becoming. And becoming means walking through rejection, through silence, through the loss of comfort and the rise of something untamed within you. That's not failure. That's rebirth. You'll notice the shift when people can no longer read you, when they can't access the old buttons that used to control you. And that's when you'll know you're not reacting anymore. You're choosing. And that choice, that inner clarity, is what Nietzsche believed separated the herd from the individual. Not arrogance, not rebellion, just the quiet, relentless decision to no longer live as someone else's echo. Nietzsche never told you to hate women. He told you to stop fearing them, to stop handing over your clarity every time beauty enters the room, to stop collapsing into performance just because you want to be desired. The real danger wasn't her. It was the part of you that abandoned yourself to stay in her orbit. And when you finally reclaim that part, you don't become bitter. You become clean, clear. You begin to see her, not as a goddess or a demon, but as a human being with her own instincts, her own chaos, her own contradictions. And suddenly, the power she had over you, it dissolves. But here's the shift Nietzsche saw coming. Once you stop needing her to complete you, she no longer knows how to keep you around. The moment you become sovereign, the dynamic flips, and many can't handle that. Not because they want control, but because control was disguised as closeness. If you don't need her emotionally, financially, sexually, what do you become? Not cold, not detached, just untouchable. That's the part most fear. A man who doesn't beg, who doesn't apologize for his strength, who doesn't shrink himself to keep peace. That man is rare. And in today's world, he's dangerous. This isn't about being above her. It's about no longer being beneath yourself. It's about seeing through the smoke of flattery, of guilt, of emotional leverage, and still choosing connection, but only on your terms. Nietzsche's ultimate warning wasn't about women. It was about the cost of never knowing who you are without them. And once you do know, you start asking simple questions. Real ones. The kind no one expects. The kind that clear the room. The kind that sound like this. If you liked me so much, why did you need to change me?